the heart of Edinburgh City is GreyFriars Cemetery. But what many people don't realize is that it is the site of one of the most horrific and darkest periods in British history.
GreyFriars history goes right back for over 500 years. It's based on a group of Franciscan monks called the GreyFriars, originally. But the actual history of the graveyard itself is really, really involved. The cemetery itself has changed its scale many times over the centuries, mainly because this was one of Edinburgh's primary dumps for the bulk of the corpses and bodies in Edinburgh. Actually, a lot of people don't realise, but this was an overflow, so the bulk of the bodies taken for the St Giles graveyards were actually put here as well. So this was mainly an overflow, a fill-in graveyard.
The GreyFriars were a group of friars who came to Scotland in the Middle Ages. One of the Scots kings let them set up place here in what's now known as GreyFriars KirkYard, and most of the area in this kirkyard became their herb garden. Eventually, during the Scottish Reformation, these people were kicked out because of huge overcrowding of bodies in the main Edinburgh burial place of the High Kirk of St Giles. The town fathers petitioned Mary Queen of Scots and said, could we get this land so that we can bury people in it? And in 1591, the first burial was made in GreyFriars KirkYard. It's amazing. GreyFriars KirkYard has around 800 tombs, but there's an awful lot more people buried here. Estimates go from about 100,000 bodies to possibly 250,000 or maybe even more. This place really is a mountain of bones. Because GreyFriars is consecrated Church of Scotland ground, you can't do any archaeological digs here unless there's a very specific non-archaeological reason. And I know that a few years ago some plumbing needed to be redone that let archaeologists come in, and literally about a foot underneath the ground you have bodies, you have skulls, you have bones, just that far underneath where you're walking.
The famous statue of GreyFriars Bobby, which sits just outside the main gates, is a welcoming sight. People of all nations come from all over the world to see the statue. But what many people don't realize is that GreyFriars KirkYard is one of the most haunted places in the world. GreyFriars is a whirlwind of paranormal activity. Hundreds of bizarre and violent attacks on visitors have been reported. Local newspapers have interviewed and photographed some of the victims, who reported deep cuts and bruises on their face and bodies. These unexplained attacks have led many to believe the grounds are haunted by a vindictive poltergeist, which assaults all those who come into its domain. The origins of these attacks are believed to be rooted in Britain's bloody history. The plague of 1645 held Edinburgh in a terrifying grip. Over 100,000 people are estimated to have died and then dumped in GreyFriars. The soft grass only thinly shrouds the corpse mountain of plague victims. But the plague was just the beginning of GreyFriars' gruesome history.
You have to remember when you're in GreyFriars that the bodies aren't just buried where you see tombs, and in fact in a lot of cases the open grassy areas would have been filled, and undoubtedly during the plagues this place would have been used for the dumping of bodies of people who had died in the plague, one of the most horrific ways to die in human history. Covenanters are a very important group of people, and they're especially linked to GreyFriars. The GreyFriars KirkYard and the Covenanters are absolutely together for much of their story. The Covenanters were effectively a group of Scots Protestants who didn't want royal interference in their religion. When the Reformation happened in Scotland, there wasn't a head of the Church of Scotland. In England, when the Reformation happened, you had Henry VIII took over and he became the main man. He became the head of the Church of England. King James I thought about perhaps becoming the head of the Church of Scotland, but decided against it. He was advised not to. His son Charles I wasn't quite as shrewd, didn't gauge public opinion terribly well, and he tried to bring in what we now know as Episcopalianism, and that didn't go down terribly well. Instead of rioting or instead of rebelling against the king, a group of concerned Scots got together and they signed this promise, this national covenant, where they basically said to King Charles I, we really like you as our king, but our religion's more important. This is our petition to you to say, please don't interfere with our religion. That's the national covenant. It was signed here on a February evening in 1638, actually inside the kirk, and the Covenanting movement was born in Scotland. Behind where I'm standing now, we have the Covenanters prison. Now, tourists, when they come and see GreyFriars today, they see a little sliver of land behind some locked gates with graves and tombs on either side. That wasn't the only area of the prison. The prison was a huge area of flat land, no tombs, they hadn't been put there yet, that stretched right along the back of the kirkyard, a large, open, flat area, very cold, very uncomfortable to live in. Sir George McKenzie was in some ways a very enlightened man. He was the leading judge in Scotland, he was the Lord Advocate. He also had a very extensive library which formed the basis of the Advocates Library, but for many people he's not remembered as Sir George McKenzie, he's remembered as Bloody Mackenzie, and he's got that rather dreadful name because he absolutely persecuted the Covenanters, and we have to remember that this persecution was known as the Killing Times, based on his reputation. In terms of how the prisoners would have been tortured, well, the ones that were going to be executed, they would get something known as the boots, which was a kind of a metal brace that was put around your leg. It was quite roomy at first. They would then take wooden staves and put them inside this, which would constrict the amount of space you had, and would eventually manage to squeeze your leg. Eventually you'd have to use something like a hammer to get these stakes in, and there is a story about one poor Covenanter prisoner who had this, and when he got up, one of the men that was applying the torture could actually hear his leg make a squishing sound because of what had happened to it. A lot of the Covenanters were actually executed just outside of GreyFriars KirkYard at the Grassmarket execution place, James Guthrie being the most famous of these. Scottish executions weren't particularly nice affairs, they were very, very public, lots of people came to see them, but sometimes the men actually hanging on the ropes could be hanging there for a considerable amount of time. The fact that people, when they were hung much later in life, when they were dropped off the gibbet, it would break their necks, they would die quite quickly. Some of the Covenanters may have been executed the old-fashioned way, where basically they were suffocated, which was a very, very long, much more drawn-out form of agony than a typical hanging.
Upon his death in 1691, in a twisted, ironic fate, it became the final resting place of the notorious Lord Advocate, Bloody George Mackenzie. Mackenzie's mausoleum looms over the graveyard, as if standing in perpetual judgment in death, over the very souls he persecuted in life.
George Mackenzie and his family weren't buried straight in through those doors. You actually have to go down a little metal grid, you have to open that, go down a set of stairs, and then there's 6 coffins at the bottom of this. There's actually a sub-level underneath that. They're reckoned to be about 12 bodies buried in there. They're not all Mackenzie's family, some random strangers were put in there at a later date.
GreyFriars has always had a reputation for being haunted, a status also enhanced from years of well-documented satanic rituals, mass corpse dumpings, and body snatching.
(1998). A homeless man looking for shelter broke into the tomb of George Mackenzie. Even the most sympathetic observer might think that GreyFriars Cemetery would be the last place a vagrant would wish to spend the night. But when you're homeless, cold, and wet, the sealed tomb of George Mackenzie might offer an apparently welcoming refuge. tomb may have protected him from the elements, but it exposed him to something much more worse. Was something now unleashed? Since the disturbance of the George McKenzie tomb, the hauntings have become more frequent and violent.
We can get 1 a week, we can get 5 or 6 a day, it depends. It can just be people being sick, it can be them fainting, it can be them wetting themselves. We do get people that report scratches, bruises, bite, punch, slap, kick marks, teeth marks. Something that's psychosomatic response, they do it themselves. If you stand scratching your neck, you walk outside and suddenly you've got scratched on your neck and you think it's the ghost. But other people, they actually do have symptoms. They have heart palpitations, they have skin rashes. Again, it can be nerves, but a lot of it is a little bit more inexplicable than that. You get hot and cold spots, you get areas where camera batteries will go flat, mobile phone batteries will go flat. People see a tremendous amount of orbs, shadows, mist patterns. They feel sick, they'll faint, they'll vomit. They get the impression that something is behind them, something's touching them on the neck, something's scratching them. We get a tremendous amount of people that seem to think they've walked through cobwebs, like something's actually touched their skin or touched their face as well.
The belief that GreyFriars is haunted by George McKenzie is one that is shared by many of its visitors.
To have a reputation as Bloody McKenzie and to have had that for 400 years, you must have something going for you, something that makes people wonder about you, that makes people think, there's something dark about this person, there's something ghostly about this person. Whether it's his ghost or not, only people that have seen it can say. The GreyFriars KirkYard ghost story, the Bloody McKenzie story, doesn't just come from the 20th century. This tomb behind me has long been thought of as being one that's been haunted, to the extent that Deacon William Brodie actually broke a man out of the Tolbooth prison and hid him in here, an ex-highway robber, hid him in here because people were so scared of this area that they wouldn't come up to this tomb. So Brodie knew he had a fairly safe place to hide this man. Certainly, having somebody breaking into a mausoleum is always going to be something that upsets members of the public. And it wasn't just a homeless man, there was also a group of youths broke in there. And I do know from kind of hard evidence that they actually ripped the head of the Lord Advocate off his body. It wasn't just the head of a skeleton that they picked up, there was a certain amount of ripping that went on. So something has definitely gone on in there that started a lot of people thinking, maybe making them extra sensitive to what's happening and thinking, that's possibly a link.
I am a believer that if a ghost is going to do something or present itself, that it's going to present itself regardless. I think the homeless man breaking in and defiling Lord Mackenzie's actual remains added to that, but I'm not convinced, personally not convinced, that that's exactly what caused it. We get a lot of mediums and clairvoyants on the tours, and they've never actually pinpointed him by name, never. Ghost activity isn't necessarily just one entity, it can be multiple entities fused together into one energy surge.
(1999). As reports of attacks continue to rise and become more violent, Colin Grant, a local spiritualist minister, is called in to perform an exorcism to banish the evil spirits. A journalist from The Scotsman, Susan Burrell, on the scent of an exclusive, accompanies Colin to witness the events of the exorcism.
I was a photographer for the Evening News and this job came up doing the séance at GreyFriars Kirk, and I've always been interested in that type of thing, and it was with Colin Grant, who I'd heard of and knew that he knew this place very well, so I was desperate to do it. Nobody else really wanted to touch it because it was at night in a graveyard, but for me it was quite interesting. Colin was a wee bit apprehensive to start with. I think I felt quite uncomfortable being here. He's been here before, he's done them here before, and I think he's well aware of what can happen here and has happened in the past. So I think for him it was certainly a new experience again. Every time he came here he said it was something different, you know. He was worried, he was apprehensive a bit. I think he was concerned about what was going to happen, who he was going to contact, especially when he had other people with him as well. I think it's different when he does these things on his own, or if he is, you know, it's different doing things in an office, but when you're out here, especially in there, it's a completely different situation. He basically spoke to who was around about him, I presume to try and invoke anybody that was there, any spirits that were there. I basically just photographed around him what he was doing. We did a couple of set-up shots, then he did the seance for real, and I just basically watched and sort of stood back a wee bit just in case. He was extremely drained, where he certainly said he'd sensed something. He didn't really go into too much detail, but I think afterwards, especially after we'd done the bit in the Covenants, because that took a wee bit of time, he was absolutely exhausted. And I think for him, because it takes so much to channel, or what was him, channel what he had to do and what he was thinking, how he was feeling. And the spirits in here aren't exactly, you know, the nicest of people, some of them. So I think a lot of that really did take its toll on him. I mean, he was absolutely exhausted. He really was. And I mean, I think he was bound to be absolutely drained by it, and I don't think he would want anything else, any adverse effects from any other part of the graveyard affecting him. He knew how many people had died in such terrible ways. And I think for him, it was really more about just trying to help them, as opposed to you know, anybody being malignant against him. But he always knew that was a risk. He always knew that was a risk, and I think he was fully prepared for that. And I think just the type of person he was prepared for it.
Once Colin had finished performing the ritual to exorcise the spirits, he went home that night, not taking any chances. He prepared himself for his worst fear. Was the exorcism at GreyFriars a battle between good and evil? We will never know. Colin Grant was found dead just 2 days later after his ordeal.
There are some people that would say it's to do with vengeful spirits. There are some people to say it might be doing with his physical condition. I keep more an open mind, because I keep an open mind with most aspects of life. Vengeful spirits, up to a point, some people can literally frighten themselves to death. So if he truly believed there was something after him, or something that was going to cause his death, he could have actually set into event a chain that would have actually caused his ultimate death.
I was quite upset, actually, more upset than I thought I would be. He's not the first person I've photographed who's died after I photographed him, but I don't know, I was just upset about it, because he was a genuinely nice person, and he really did care for what he did, and he cared about the people that he was trying to help, and he took everything on board and took everything to heart. So it was really quite sad. He was a very, very special man. I think I actually read it in the newspaper. It was in evening news, if I remember rightly. It was a while ago now, but if I remember rightly, that was how. And it was sad. It was sad to read it. I think he had an amazing gift that he really used to help, and there's not a lot of people out there that have a gift like he had. He was just desperate to help people. He was desperate to help anybody that was stuck in there. And I think for him it was definitely a lifelong ambition to you know, get through to the ones that were through here, any of the ones that were stuck in GreyFriars. He had a great affiliation with it, and I think for him, I would hope not. I would really hope not, because I think genuinely he just wanted to help. He really did just want to help and use his talent to be able to do that.
It's given GreyFriars a lot of notoriety for a start, although today there isn't a lot of people that come on the tours anymore that actually have even heard of the Reverend Grant, to be honest with you. Or we do remind them of the man. We get little surges in paranormal activity. Again, it can be caused to that. Sometimes spiritual activity, if you bring in any form of exorcism, they tend to go quiet, then they'll have a resurgence. So it really depends on your individual point of view.
Some believe that the evil forces Grant battled were so powerful, the intervention killed him.
I think he was always prepared for that. I think in his own head he was always prepared for that. He always seemed to have company around him. And I don't know if that was people he helped in the past or what, I don't know, but I think he always had it in the back of his head that could happen and that it may happen. But I think for a man of his sort of talents, I think he just kind of accepted it. It was almost like it was part of the job, you know. I suppose, I don't know, no more than anybody else, I suppose, but I think in his line of work and when he was doing this type of thing, especially in here, I think he always knew that anything can happen, anything's possible, and he understood that, and I think he just lived with it on a day-to-day basis, with every séance he did, not just in here.
To this day, attacks are still being reported. Believers in the vengeful spirit of George McKenzie are now more convinced that some dark force stalks GreyFriars.
We still get people who claim there are things there. We still get people that tell us they're scratched and bitten and bruised and followed home. We still get hot and cold spots. We still get people who get dizzy and vomit and wet themselves and pass out, and we still get it to this day.
Black Heart Entertainment, a local tour company, have run a nightly haunted graveyard tour in GreyFriars for over 20 years. The tour guides have witnessed tourists being viciously mauled by an unseen entity. Despite the reputation and dangers of being attacked, visitors still come.
We've actually got this documented, it's on our board. He left saying that he left in a horrible state. He was trembling, he was nervous, he was sweaty, and he actually said, "This place will kill me." And within about 2 weeks, he was dead, sadly.
It's a bit Loch Ness Monster. If you actually discover what's causing it or who's causing it, then the actual attraction might disappear. I'm a great believer in there are certain things in spirit or certain things in the supernatural that's best left to your own conclusions. I'm a great believer in that. The guys that have been here over the 12 years that the tours company have run, we've seen our fair share of weird and wonderful stuff. So we can only tell people what we see here and what happens around us. I would like to think it's one of the most haunted places, definitely.
There's a fascinating history at GreyFriars KirkYard, but it is undoubtedly reputed to be one of the very most haunted places in the world. Certainly in Britain, but absolutely in the top 10 haunted places in the world. There's something truly horrific about this place's history that makes people wanting to come back here and learn more about it, learn more about potentially a paranormal activity side of the place. If you happen to believe in ghost stories, coming to a place that's got such historical misery attached to it, this is the man who persecuted people. Down at the other end of the kirkyard, you've actually got bones and bodies of people that were tortured. Right behind us, we've got the place where a lot of people were imprisoned, and some heartbreaking scenes took place. There's a story about one man who was going to be sent on a boat to a plantation in America, begging with the authorities so they wouldn't have to go on this boat, and the authority said, "Yeah, we'll let you off, but only if your brother comes." This is a very, very tragic area with a very, very ghostly man with a very bad reputation right behind us. So
some believers think that the attacks are connected to the religious persecution that occurred centuries ago. Some think that its origins lie much deeper and has resulted from an accumulation of negative energy arising from GreyFriars' horrific past that has manifested.
GreyFriars KirkYard itself isn't the only horrible thing around here. You've got the local lunatic asylum, Bedlam, just next to us. You've got the Covenanters prison behind us. You've got the Grassmarket execution place, feet away from the end of the kirkyard. And on a certain clear day, you'd probably been able to see bodies being burned and the smoke rising from the witches' execution place on Castle Hill.
I think there's multiple spirits haunting GreyFriars because we get a lot of different people mention different things. They mention different sights, different sounds, different voices. I believe it is something here, possibly trapped souls, trapped energy, I'm not entirely sure. But we see things in here all the time that can convince some of us at least that there is a lot of energy in the cemetery and it is still here.